Hello and welcome to our demonstration of the multi-select two-side job. So the basic idea of multi-select two-side here is that this gives us a multi-select item where the users can select from a list right here and use the controls to basically select fields that they want to add to the list. They can do so individually, and then they can add and remove items as a whole as well. So how does this actually work? Well, there are two main ways that you might want to use this job. The first is if you're starting a job from scratch. By far the easiest way to use this functionality is just to load the job up from the load example job menu right here and just simply load this job in, and you can see when you run it here, you'll have the functionality all set up. There'll be one item of configuration that we need to do in just a second. I'll talk about exactly what that is. But the other common way that you might want to use this library is within an existing job. And the way that works is basically this. You're going to go into your existing job and you're going to create 6 code block elements from the layout code block area right here. In between these two guys then, you're going to add a select menu and you're going to make sure to call it the exact value multi-select 2. So in other words, you can have a label, but you need to make sure that its name is multi-select 2. For each one of the code block items, make sure that enabled and inline is the block display mode right here. Though some of these do have slightly different versions. So for example, the second one has enabled freeform. So you want to make sure that for every one of these guys, you select the appropriate code block display mode right here. For each one of these fields that you've added to the form then, you will notice that you have a block of code either in the raw block, raw CSS, or raw JavaScript code block. Make sure you copy and paste those fields into the exact same matching location in your new job. With that done then, you should have the exact same thing that you had if you just loaded the job up from load example job menu. You should be able to run this job and you should have the control as you can see here. Now for either method, that is starting from scratch or adding this to an existing job, there's going to be one item of configuration that you need to perform, which is in this third field right here. So within the third field, this is where we actually define our label, our options that we have for our select list right here. You'll of course want to change these, both the value and the label right here, for whatever your form requires. It should be noted, of course, that if you had a database query, for example, that you wanted to populate this field from, that you would need to query the database and then use raw PHP to iterate over all the options that you have. It's obviously a more advanced function. If you have any questions about that, please let us know. Basically, with that all done then, you should now have your multi-select two-side job done. Just as a quick bit of technical discussion, the way this plugin basically works is this. In our page properties under page JavaScript, we include jQuery multi-select two-side from our additional JavaScript library, as we have right here. And then this is going to basically present the form with the needed libraries in order to run this particular script. Then we have our 6 code block elements. The first one is going to initiate the multi-select code. And you'll notice here that the ID that it's triggering is off of the ID of our initial, that is, left-hand side item right here. Please note, however, that this is not what actually is being written to essentially a page submission in RackForms. The values that we actually include are from this guy right here. That's why it's very important that we name this guy multi-select 2. So in other words, multi-select as in this is the root field that we're selecting, and then underscore 2 to say that this is where the multi-select options go. In other words, if you've never done this before in JavaScript, a lot of times when you import and use a library like this, they'll sort of have, I guess you'd consider, naming conventions, and this is a good example of that. The field, essentially the initializer for this, is just multi-select. So we never actually say where our multi-select items are essentially going to be written to. That is, what this box is called, but that's because we name it using a naming convention. So it's, again, the field name that we're using to initialize it with, plus the underscore 2 right here. With all that done then, you should have the basics of this form running. All the rest of this code then is really just for layout and control purposes. So you notice here that I'm using a really cool technique where I have a div that's being opened right here and then closed below our select item. This is how we actually arrange all of our items so they're in this nice tidy row like we have right here. And then finally, of course, we have some other code, in this case CSS, to make sure everything looks good. Of course, we can change any of this if you have the wherewithal to do that. You can do things like change the styling, change the spacing, and so on. So that's a basic demonstration of how our multi-select two-side job works.